Look into this dark, unforgiving glass eye, the mesh of the microphone. Tell it your deepest thoughts, hopes, fears, and desires. We will take these emotions, turn them, and feed them back to you, for we have goals that your feelings will assist. This is how we rule. From the shadows, playing your emotions like puppet strings, we lead you to destinations that we have prepared, and you willingly oblige, thinking these decisions to be your own. When you do as we wish, we reward you, and when you go against us, we punish you. In a million subtle ways, we influence your supposedly free choice. By this method, we rule over a population convinced that they are the masters of their own destiny. Welcome to the Empire of Lies.
And yes, welcome to the Empire of Lies indeed. This is the second official episode of Empire of Lies. Welcome everyone. We had an excellent first episode last Thursday night. And I remind everyone, you can keep this time slot pegged on Thursday evening for more Empire of Lies. We have months of material prepared for this. We've been working on it for at least 3 months behind the scenes. We have a lot to deliver to you in fun, what do they call it? Edutainment? Yes, that's what they call it.
Yes.
Edutainment. So tonight is no different. As you can see from the title, this one is Pseudo-Reality, the Brutalisation of Language. And before I pass it off to my man Newsfist to start the stream, I would like to tell you 2 things. First up, what brutalization means in this context. The word brutal or brutalize means to make bestial, to make primal, to remove what makes something human and make it inhuman. That is brutalization when used this way. And number 2, this stream is a shorter stream with focused content, commentary that we have mostly prepared, but we will be doing a little bit of off-the-cuff things and telling a few jokes here and there perhaps. And it will run for about an hour. And then if there is paid engagement, we will get to those at the end. It's not like Discordant Dragons, where I read the super chats as they come in every 15 to 20 minutes. No, this is a short stream, and we will read all of the community engagement at the end, including the one that we missed last week on Subscribestar. So you can contribute, as the opening video showed you, via intro. I clicked the wrong thing. Forgive me.
Whoops.
You can contribute via PayPal, Subscribestar, Entropy, Cash App. You can send rants on Rumble. You can send hyper chats on Odyssey, and of course, I prefer Entropy. That is the pinned comment in the YouTube chat that you can see there, and we will be getting to those in about an hour from now. So, Newsfist, I pass it over to you. Tell us about pseudo-reality, the brutalization of language.
So, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Everyone knows the difference between the blue pill and the red pill, to use common parlance. Have you ever met someone so normie that it's not just a case of they believe a few weird things? You know, all of us believe in stuff that is probably wrong, but someone who's literally every single thing that they believe is false. What is the description for such a state? The description is the pseudo-reality. This comes from Josef Pieper, originally the term in his book, Abusive Language, Abuse of Power. And the idea behind the pseudo-reality is when, and it's sort of crucial to this idea of the stream, the Empire of Lies, it is when your entire world is constructed out of lies. I mean, you might realize sort of like little things truthfully, you know, like where your breakfast is coming from, you know, how to get by at work. But everything else, everything that your sort of distant world is based on is essentially a lie. And these lies are fed to you. These lies are manufactured, and it is done in a specific sense in order to get you to do stuff. If we can just switch to the small view, yes, right. Josef Pieper, Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power. Excellent book. Thoroughly recommend it. It's only about 58 pages. It starts getting good about 20 pages in. And
as you're getting started here, Newsfist, I'm going to go ahead and share the link for this in the chat. And for those of you listening not live, the links to everything that we cover in Empire of Lies are archived and then shared in the description of the video where you're listening to the VOD. So if you want to follow along or do your reading before you listen to this educational content, then you can do so at your leisure. So go ahead, Newsfist.
So, as Pieper says, the abuse of political power is fundamentally connected with the sophistic abuse of the world. We'll be getting into sophism a bit later in the stream, but sophism is basically artful lies. It is the abuse of language. It is not a lie where, you say to someone, red is blue. You can certainly work them around to that. But sophistry is when, in order to make someone believe that red is blue, first you convince them that it's an off blue. Then you convince them it's a shade of green and then a shade of orange. And you eventually work them around to believing the opposite of what is true. Indeed, finds in it the fertile soil in which to hide and grow and get ready. So much so that the latent potential of the totalitarian poison can be ascertained, as it were, by observing the symptom of the public abuse of language. The degradation, too, of man through man, alarmingly evident in the acts of physical violence committed by all tyrannies, such as concentration camps and torture, has its beginning, certainly much less alarmingly, at that almost imperceptible moment when the word loses its dignity. So, what he's basically saying, it goes on a bit more. The dignity of the word, to be sure, consists in this. Through the word is accomplished what no other means can accomplish, namely, a communication based on reality. Once it becomes evident that both areas, as has to be expected, are connected, the relationship based on mere power, and thus the most miserable decay of human interaction, stands in direct proportion to the most devastating breakdown in orientation towards reality. Now, what Pieper is talking about there is when the state begins to lie. It begins to lie artfully, and not only does it lie, but it begins to use its coercive force to make you accept the lie, number one, and to stop you from saying anything contrary to the lie. We have all experienced this since the outbreak of the revolution in, I guess you could probably date it from 2019. COVID and BLM are basically the start of the revolution, which is now sort of finishing up. The abuse of words is always the prefiguring of the abuse of violence, the abuse of man, since it is through the use of words that violence is justified before it is done. No one wants to use the word genocide. It's such an ugly word. But not only that, were you to come out simply and say your evil intent, people might try and stop you. So you edge them around. Diversity, equity, inclusion is a much kinder phrase that conceals much darker ends. There are a number of sort of rhetorical phrases, rhetorical devices, techniques that are used to conceal this fact that essentially there are evil ends involved and that there are lies afoot. The easiest way to spot such a trick is to watch what happens when the old meaning of a word is used. The response will be shrill and immediate. There will be no arguing on the merits. There will be no reference to a dictionary. Instead, vitriol and personal attacks will issue forth. It will be proclaimed that only the wrong kind of person would dare to ask such questions, that the old words are outmoded, that they are not progressive, and such discourse has no place in our society. The term progressive in of itself is especially evil. Hidden within it the assumption that as long as society is progressing, it must be good no matter the destination. I mean, you can be progressing towards the gulag and they say, oh, this gulag, it's so progressive, it's so new, it's so shiny. Of course, if you study enough history and you study enough politics, dear viewer, you will realize there is nothing new under the sun. And this abuse of language is also nothing new. Indeed, It goes back to Plato about 2000 BC. There is nothing new under the sun. What simply happens is that people forget, and then the people that would gain power try it on again. Communism is an excellent example of this. In fact, it would probably be easier to say that this abuse is always there in embryo, and the only time that people do not try it on is when the memory of its abuse is fresh in the minds of the abused.
That's one of the reasons why we say that people that have had, that have recently caught the communism, like Eastern Europe, for example,
Yes.
they're the ones that have it fresh in their mind, in their cultural zeitgeist. So everyone has a little more frayed of a nerve to it, and so they pay attention to it more. Just like how the Boers in South Africa are very keen and aware of the anti-whiteism, unlike whites in most of our other countries.
Yeah, exactly. Because the memory is still fresh. You can see such people have seen the progressive destination. There is no fooling the Boer that anti-whiteism will result in equity. There is no fooling the Eastern European that communism will result in a better society. They have seen the destinations of these roads, and they fight to stop going down them. This is an old communist formation, obviously. For the communists were always the masters of the abuse of language as prefiguring the abuse of power. This is done purely so that people will not think about it too hard, to create, as it were, a veil around them, a pseudo-reality like a hall of mirrors made from soap bubbles. As long as one stands in the center of this construct and looks about them, all appears complete. Everything appears to line up. A million subtle encouragements and discouragements are given to those in the pseudo-reality to make sure they do not stray. After all, the proper people also live in the pseudo-reality, and with such position gain access to social and monetary benefits. Those who express doubt in the pseudo-reality will be cast out from polite society and given harsh economic and social sanction. The pseudo-reality is a truly monstrous invention. I would actually go a bit further. I would say satanic, actually, to be perfectly honest. If you can define evil, the pseudo-reality is a massive part of evil. There is an old phrase that if you can get people to believe in absurdities, you can get them to commit atrocities. We are seeing this very, very clearly at the moment with anti-whiteism, the trans thing. I mean, just anything you can think of, really.
Because they have inverted the divine order, the natural order of embracing nature, embracing your sex and gender role, embracing your ethnic identity, embracing your racial or civilizational heritage. And now those things have become not just unacceptable, but immoral, which I will get to later in one of my prepared pieces. This is exactly what you're talking about, that forcing people to live in a pseudo-reality is not just uncomfortable or negative, socially speaking. It's actually evil and inhuman.
Agreed. And it is also very clearly about getting people to ignore the evidence of their own senses. This is one of the reasons why institutions are always so involved in this. Things like science, the government, right? This is an old communist thing. They take you in for re-education, and you'd say, well, I don't believe in X. And this was very, very prominent when the Chinese did it. I think Lifton talks about this. We'll talk about Lifton in another episode. And the people not exactly torturing you, but struggle sessioning you would be like, oh, what, you think the government could make a mistake? The government can't make a mistake. The government is all wise, is all knowing. In a sense, during COVID, this is what science became. What, you saying that science made a mistake? You're not a scientist. How dare you even have a thought on such a thing?
And like we were mentioning earlier, or like I mentioned earlier about brutalization and what that means, they're making this a very inhuman thing, because what they're saying is this pseudo-reality we've created, the experts, the corporate HR managers, the people in politics that tell you these things, you must behave as if they are infallible like God. They have created a false God. And, well, as far as the Christian nomenclature goes, that's the very definition of satanic.
Let's go back to the large cam while I do
Certainly.
the rest of this. Okay, let me get back to... Okay. The pseudo-reality is a truly monstrous invention. While trapped in it, a man may consider himself knowledgeable about many things, but understand nothing. In fact, even worse, like it would actually be preferable if he understood nothing. Instead, he understands everything wrongly and, convinced of his own understanding, will defend his wrong understanding, sometimes unto the death. He is so convinced of his knowledge, he will persecute those who disagree. However, in my opinion, there is a deep sense within us that allows us to discern the truth, and when trapped in the pseudo-reality, a part of the mind constantly recoils at this unnatural state. The way to cope with this impulse is to persecute vigorously anyone who might puncture the soap bubble thin mirror that comprises the pseudo-reality, lest one pane break, revealing that all is not well. If someone in the pseudo-reality loses just one plank, the rest rapidly falls. It is a fragile structure supported by all of the other planks that make it up. This, by the way, is why even the smallest red pills over time can be extremely effective, because the red pills weaken and puncture this sort of false mirror. I like to think of it as like mirrored soap bubbles, being surrounded by mirrored soap bubbles, if you will. And all of these soap bubbles surrounding you are on strings, and these strings can be pulled and distort the shape of the entire thing. Have you ever seen a bunch of soap bubbles clumped together and they make sort of like a frame, and it's a bit like that.
But if you start popping them, the whole thing falls apart.
Correct.
And that's why the meme war has been so good for our side of things. That's why things like the Go Free method that spread the curative contagion, it's little mental shields that help pop those bubbles.
Exactly. The pseudo-reality is implanted when very young, which is why the communists are always so interested in education, by the way. Built up like a castle of spun sugar inside the developing mind through a million corrections and coercions, until those inside will literally ignore the evidence of their own senses. Something, as I said, we have seen many times with the vaccine, anti-whiteism, gender theory. I mean, just anything. I mean,
the so-called summer of love.
I mean, the pseudo-reality really is what Orwell is trying to describe in 1984, when he says that war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. It is people who are trapped inside the pseudo-reality. If you look at the character of Winston Smith, for example, the main character in the book, he was basically not brought up in the pseudo-reality, right? Like he became a member of the party after the war, but he was a child before it was implanted. And this is why in the back of his mind, he still has tools to grapple with it, where you contrast the other people, the other characters in the book who have grown up since the invention of the pseudo-reality, and they are completely posed, as they would say.
Yeah.
Those who control the makeup of the pseudo-reality have ultimate control over those within it. Like an intricate network of soap bubbles attached to strings, the string need merely be pulled, the framing adjusted, and the abomination against truth will not only be swallowed whole, but vigorously defended. Any reference to the previous frame is immediately forgotten or exiled to "that's different," without examining why. If you want a really good example of this, look at the difference between the way people look at the Russia-Ukraine war versus the Israel-Palestine war.
Yeah.
All of the reasons are
alternatively, the way recently people have viewed the necessity of wearing masks for a particular illness that is in all ways infectious, like colds and flus have canonically been for decades and decades, and yet there was no massive demand for everybody to mask up for those, was there? Not for the old H1N1, not for the bird flu, not for any of these other ones. But now you've got all these people, even still today, even though there's no more mandate, how many people do you see driving in their cars wearing their masks? Walking in the grocery store wearing a mask?
You're not a scientist, are you? I can't believe you would comment on something so bloody obvious without being a scientist, as Ketanji Brown Jackson said when she was being confirmed for the Supreme Court. Someone asked her,
forgive me, I'm not an infectious disease doctor.
someone asked her what a woman is. She's like, oh, well, I'm not a biologist. This
I
is
remember
another
that
feature of the pseudo-reality, the
Mhm.
constant need to refer to anything that would go outside it to an expert who will affirm the pseudo-reality for you. The man in the pseudo-reality, the pseudo-man, as I like to call him,
Mhm.
lives from moment to moment, from frame to frame, never asking why. He trusts the organs of the pseudo-reality, the media, the right people, more than he trusts his own senses. The more complex the situation, paradoxically, the more simple the solution. Large war overseas with many combatants and a long history, simple solution. Widespread economic malaise, simple solution. You know, you got a virus like running around, very, very simple solution. Just listen to the experts. They will tell you what to do. And finally, why do people live in the pseudo-reality? Sure, there is coercion, but you cannot make people really inhabit it with coercion alone. To go back to 1984, which I would highly recommend everyone read if they haven't read it. At the end, after Winston is tortured, this is of course the Stalinist method. The Chinese method would be a lot less brutal. He sees himself flying through a corridor of golden light. He has accepted everything in the pseudo-reality. Everything is so easy now. He is cleansed of troublesome thoughts. He leaves his body shouting confessions as he goes. Never forget the pure, unutterable joy that comes from never having to think for yourself, of living in a world where everything is in its right place. All the bumps smoothed over, and if they are encountered, quickly forgotten. Pseudo-man lives from moment to moment in a world of perpetual joy, never troubled by the hard questions, for there is an answer always readily available, like on Google, for example, the BBC, or just, watch Dr. Fauci tell you, have your troubles.
Or just do what they tell you in the HR meetings.
That's right. You never have to worry about who to trust because you trust the organs of the pseudo-reality. And you would never dare to not trust Dr. Fauci. You would never dare to not trust the government, to not trust the BBC, the Trusted News Initiative. Trust is in the name. It's the Trusted News Initiative, guys. Come on. People will go to war and endure great hardship to preserve this structure, which is why you frequently see pseudo-man fighting vigorously against those who would try and wake him up.
Yeah.
That's the end of that monologue. I hope you enjoyed that, guys.
No, that was good. I like the way you wrapped it up. It's it really tied a bow on it because this shows what we're up against, guys. This is why it's difficult when we have hundreds or thousands of hours, like many of you out there have, of studying reality around you that dispels the lies of the media and politicians. And that's why it's so hard when you try to share that knowledge, even with love and care, with those people close to you, why they reject it and look at you like you're the problem, which we'll be getting to in a minute.
Actually, I'd just like to mention a comment from Streaky Bacon. Hey, man.
Oh, sure. I'll go ahead and pop it open.
The last paragraph of 1984, Winston loved Big Brother as the bullet entered his brain, just like our governments. Now, this is absolutely getting to the heart of the matter. Unlike the film, which is great, apart from the fact that they had to change the ending. In the ending of the film, he meets Julia and they run into each other's arms and they are cut down by a hail of machine gun fire. Oh, no. In the book, the pseudo-reality wins. He runs into Julia many years later. They barely speak. There is no tender reunion, and he is eventually killed. And, he loves Big Brother in his final breath. But before this, he's reduced to an alcoholic wreck. Now, if we go on to... Okay, so the next thing basically is, how is the pseudo-reality constructed? The way it is constructed is sophistry, and Yiz has some stuff to say on this, but I'm just going to set it up.
Please do.
Let's go to the small cam, please. This is Plato's Sophist. This is from a very, very long time ago. It's like 2000 BC or something crazy like that. And this text demonstrates exactly how you can lie. It demonstrates the dialectic, which, is sold to you as a way to come to the truth of something, but in reality, it is a way to obfuscate almost anything. And the way it works is that you have two ideas, dialectic, and supposedly they clash together and you get closer to the truth. But that's not really what happens. What happens is through the dialogue, you are confused, and he who understands the dialogue slowly moves you towards the destination. You see this very, very clearly now, and people are like, oh, you might disagree. Let's have a conversation. They're not about to have a conversation with you, right? A conversation would be two people expressing their views, attempting to come to the truth. This is a different conversation where they will try and work you around to their point of view. They have already prejudged your point of view to be wrong. There is no give and take. Now, Plato, Socrates and his friend come across the sophist, and he's like, well, you know, what is a sophist exactly? And instead of just saying, oh, it's someone skilled with language who tries to mess with your brain, right? They're like, oh, no. Let us have a dialogue, right? Plato was very into this kind of like stuff. And there's a funny story about Diogenes I'll share at the end of this. So they're trying to say, well, you know, we should try our hand upon some more obvious animal, because he is a creature not easily caught, who may be made the subject of a logical experiment. Shall we say an angler? Now, any normal person, if you ask them what an angler is, a fisherman, you would say it is a man who catches fish. That is the truthful definition. You might be able to say, oh, well, you know, some people fish with a certain kind of rod, some people catch certain kinds of fish, but basically it is a guy who fishes, right? This is why, by the way, I would highly recommend people dictionaries, Wordnik in particular, Wordnik. Wordnik is great. It will give you results from about 6 different dictionaries. And if you're ever in an argument with someone who refuses to acknowledge the basic definition of a word, go to Wordnik, pick out the definition, and give it to them. And if they say, oh, well, you just lost because you had to define something, tell them to go pound sand, because that is a ridiculous argument. If we start arguing about what is a car, and I say a car is a unicorn, and then you come back with a dictionary definition that says, no, a car is not a uniform, and I'm like, you lost. It's just ridiculous. So the way they go on, right? In the first place, the angler is an artist, and there are 2 kinds of art: productive art, which includes husbandry, manufactures, imitations, and acquisitive art, which includes learning, trading, fighting, and hunting. The angler's is an acquisitive art, and acquisition may be effected either by exchange or by conquest. In the latter case, either by force or by craft. Conquest by craft is called hunting, and of hunting there is one kind which pursues inanimate, and another which pursues animate objects. And animate objects may be either land animals or water animals, and water animals either fly over the water or live in the water. So you see what this is doing. It's just needlessly confusing the point. The hunting of the last is called fishing, and of fishing one kind uses enclosures, catching the fish in nets and baskets, and the other kind strikes them either with spears by night, or with barbed spears or barbed hooks by day. The barbed spears are impelled from above. The barbed hooks are jerked into the heads and lips of the fish, which are then drawn from below upwards. Thus, by a series of divisions, we have arrived at the definition of the angler's art. No, you haven't. I mean, you could. This is basically the leftist meme thing, right? When, like, you know, you try and talk to a leftist, and instead of getting a short, concise thing, it's like a billion lines of text. This is what they're doing, right?
Yeah, sorry. And the other side of this, the foil to this that they will use against you, sophistry is the overanalyzation, the over-explanation to force the person that you're trying to brutalize into getting lost in the weeds with over-information. The other side of this is called playing the hatchling, which I'm sure we'll cover in another episode. But it's where they ask you, oh, well, what does that mean? Oh, what does this mean? They act like they've never heard of anything before, and they make you explain everything needlessly over and over again as a tool to trip you up and to make it sound like the things you're talking about are unapproachable and most people listening don't understand what you're talking about. That's the hatchling maneuver, which is sort of the opposite of sophistry, which is oversaturating and over-engagement.
Have you got a source for that, Yiz? I'll need an exact source. A scientific paper exactly stating your argument. I can't possibly argue without a source. Do you have a degree in that subject? A degree in that actual subject?
Exactly.
Do you have a PhD? How can you define like this? Look, that's a very, very, very good point. And through this method, right, you undermine people and say, oh, you cannot trust the evidence of your own senses. And usually in terms of like government or social transformation, this lie is basically pursued until it becomes absolutely impossible to ignore. Immigration in the UK would be an excellent example. White replacement in the UK for literally a decade. Oh, it's not happening. Oh, you're some kind of conspiracy theorist. Oh, you're probably racist. Now it's completely impossible to ignore. And they've shifted on to like, oh yeah, and here's why it's a good thing, don't you know, right? Like, yes, okay, it was happening. There's never any backtracking. There's never any, oh yeah, we lied about that, by the way. We totally knew it was happening, and we just didn't want anyone to talk about it, so we called anyone who talked about it a racist. None of that. Now we have some bits from Pieper, I believe you wanted to talk about. Yes.
Speaking of the pseudo-reality construction, because you guys know that wordplay and the construction of narratives, that's sort of my wheelhouse. And there are two snippets from the short book that I want you guys to read, Abusive Language, Abuse of Power. There are two snippets that I have prepared things to say. They're not very long, but they're important, and I want to get to them. The first one we have up here is Sophistry of his time, a danger and a threat besetting the pursuits of human mind and life of society in any era. Now, that should ring true with you guys today that have learned a lot of this the hard way. And like I've said many times on this channel, the legendary phrase from the aforementioned Orwell's 1984, "It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words." That is the foundation for the mind war that's been waged against us. It is the primary pillar of constructing the pseudo-reality, of the brutalization of language, because language is a tool. The words that we have are the tools in our toolbox for communication. They're the tools we use to take a thought here, build it between me and another person, so that idea exists in the other person's mind, and we share that tool together. Sophists sneak into your toolbox like a thief in the night. They cast illusion magic to change the size, the shape, and the function of your tools in your language toolbox, so that when you reach for a tool that you are sure you know, it looks and feels the same to you. But when you reach out into society to work on something, it no longer performs the function that it's supposed to. We've seen this with words like freedom, liberty, equal, equality, fairness, democracy, nationalism, ethnic identity, and even the word racism itself no longer means what it originally was introduced to us as 100 years ago. So those who are at the forefront of this lexicon illusion are the ones who benefit, because they're the only ones who know what the updated tools do or what they mean. And therefore, they're the only ones who can use those tools to move and shape society, leaving you unable to do anything.
And I'd like to point out here that a lot of this stuff comes from mystery schools and secret societies, just the general structure of them. The idea that there are two meanings of a word. There is the outward meaning for the profane, and there is the inner meaning for the initiated. This, you know, if you've ever studied anything about the occult, it's all through this, because the best way to lie to people, essentially, is just to write it all out. But the words don't mean, if anyone picks it up and they read it, they won't think anything about it, because they don't understand what the words really mean. The UN, for example, is full of this. Sustainability, this, social emotional learning, you know, reimagining, all of this kind of globo homo stuff. This is why when someone, you know, when I talk about the UN and people are like, oh, there's no way they could keep a conspiracy that large hidden. What are you talking about? It's not hidden. It's literally right there. They're just not speaking a language that you understand. All of these words have different sub rosa meanings, right? And the people often who are sort of attach themselves, who are not initiated, they sort of understand that the word isn't quite the same as in common parlance, but it's not until they sort of move up into the upper echelons that they grasp the full meaning. So, they
Right.
don't realize, for example, that sustainability means, basically poverty, that
Yeah.
inclusivity means less white people,
Yep.
it's et cetera, or diversity means less white people, inclusivity means excluding your political opponents.
Because when you look at things proffered by, like, for example, UN Agenda 2030, they will use language that says we need to modernize and optimize migration. And they don't say immigration because they don't believe in countries and sovereignty. So that's a trick right there. They say migration instead of immigration. And they say the reason is to enrich your future and to ensure that economically we can grow. And see, it doesn't mean any of that. What it means is we want to disempower the host population because we hate national sovereignty. We want to replace you with a magic trick with people who are pliable and loyal to us. And economic growth means they are going to steal everything that we have and everything that we have inherited for themselves. That's what that means. But they say nice, friendly words. And with this sophistry trick, with the changing of the lexicon, with the illusion cast on the toolbox of the words in your head, they are able to get away with these atrocities with a smile on their face and publicly announcing what it is they're going to do.
It's a bit like if you've ever lived in a particularly violent area and you've run into the kind of criminal who will do an assault or something worse on someone, and the entire time they are hitting them, they will be saying nice words like, what's wrong? Don't struggle. Like I have seen this in real life. It's really quite unnerving, and this is basically the same process. The idea is to try and short circuit the brain with the difference between what they are experiencing and what they are hearing. Many people are extremely well seduced by words.
Let's move to the second slide now that you just popped open there, because this goes along with what we talked about a little bit last week too. This one, the quote here is, "This merchandising of wisdom, the disregard of the essential difference between money and spirit." The difference, what this means is the difference between the physical, the material, and the metaphysical and the divine. Again, the inversion. One is pretending to be the other. They get swapped in the toolbox. I've also said many times on this channel and on other people's channels that capitalism and communism are each a side of the same materialist shekel. We've seen this play out in real time the last 60 to 80 years. Everything philosophical, everything spiritual, everything religious, everything valuable about cultural history, about purpose, about meaning has been reduced to integers of social value, or dollars in other words. And that debasement is another core pillar of what's being done to us, of this pseudo-reality. Because as those things decay our people, one of the main methods through which we have been culturally and racially built up is stripped. We have become deracinated because things that didn't have monetary material value have been debased and assigned nothing but monetary material value.
Or, I mean, not even necessarily material value. One of the things about these kinds of values is they are enforced from above. When it comes to sort of abstract things, thick concepts, you ascribe your own value to them. Perhaps I value art more than you. Perhaps I value beauty or family, or, no, in the totalitarian society, the government will ascribe a value. It may be monetary, it may be social, to whatever thing that they wish to promote. So at the moment, for example, being trans is very, very high value. If social utility was measured in, good boy points, you get 1,000 good boy points for being trans. You get a -1,000 for being hetero. You get 1,000,000 good boy points for being anything other than white. And if you're white,
That's basically what I was getting at here, is when you look at things that traditionally haven't been about material or dollar value, like church and purpose and charity. Well, look what the war machine state has done to that. Churches and charity now, they're about numbers and values they can assign to the act of charity so they can hit certain tax brackets or tax write-offs for their quote-unquote business of charity and church. That, to me, is turning the metaphysical into the physical, the divine into the profane.
Yes, the debasement of
Yeah.
the divine,
Yeah.
the debasement essentially of everything sacred and holy.
Yeah.
Love, family, tradition, roots, all of these things are debased. They are so actively discouraged, it is impossible to ignore at this point.
Yeah.
The government will impose their values. The UN will impose the values. The UN will, impose the values that your church has. Does your religion not like the gay? Well, too bad. Have you considered joining the Globo Homo Rainbow Church instead? Where you can go in on a Sunday and a trans woman will be standing, or perhaps an actual woman, maybe two of them, and perhaps they'll do a comedy stand-up routine to tell you about the words of Jesus. I actually saw one of these. Oh my God, it was.
I would argue that any female being a priest is comedy, but whatever.
No. When I just a little aside, last Easter we wound up at an Anglican church. Anglican is possibly the most POS denomination in the UK, and there were two, not really priests, one woman and one man, and they had up the front a prop cage made out of foam with like a little gap, and they then proceeded to do a comedy routine about a rabbit escaping from the cage as a way of explaining the concept of the empty tomb.
Oh, no.
I was not impressed. I was really...
That sounds tragic.
Mate, I was absolutely seething. I was just like,
well,
what is this?
Speaking of cages, I think now would be a good time for us to segue into the Wikipedia article.
Yep.
Because the last thing we're going to cover in this segment is what is done to you when you observe or profess your unsatisfaction with the pseudo-reality. When the pseudo-reality is in total power, this is what happens. So I'm going to take just a moment here and read a bit from Wikipedia, then I'm going to talk about it, unless you'd like to read it. Do you want to read it, or do you want me to?
Oh, I'll read it, sure.
Sure.
So this article is about psychology, the abuse of psychology in the USSR. In case you're not aware, in the Soviet Union, you could basically get locked up for wrongthink, which is, common in totalitarian societies. But the way that the Soviets did it, of course, was scientific, the abuse of science, which, of course, we have seen. The anti-Soviet political behavior of some individuals being outspoken in their opposition to the authorities, demonstrating for reform, very, very bad, and writing critical books, were defined simultaneously as criminal acts and as symptoms of mental illness, e.g. the delusion of reformism. Everything old is new again. Soon it will be the delusion of genderism, and susceptible to a ready-made diagnosis, for example, sluggish schizophrenia, which basically meant they couldn't find anything wrong with you except that you didn't believe in the pseudo-reality.
Yeah.
Within the boundaries of the diagnostic category, the symptoms of pessimism, poor social adaptation, and conflict with authorities were themselves sufficient for a formal diagnosis of sluggish schizophrenia. It's so hard. You do not agree with the government. Oh, you must be mentally ill. We've got a cure for that.
I just need you to read that second paragraph, and then I'm going to go to my closing statement for this segment. But before we do, I'd like to remind everyone that at the end of the segment, I will be reading all of the paid chats. So you still have about 15 minutes to get in all of your paid chats over on Entropy, Odyssey, Rumble, Cash App, PayPal. You can even send rants on Rumble, hyper chats on Odyssey too. And if you are a Subscribestar user, you can send tips via the tip feature over on Subscribestar. And if you like the content that me and Newsfist do here, you can support us both monthly by subscribing to my Subscribestar or on the monthly subscription options on his profile on Rumble. And I will be halving all of the money that I bring in on Empire of Lies with my good friend Newsfist here. And we'll get to those at the end of the segment. So without further ado, please go ahead and take this second paragraph, and then I will read my closing dissertation on this topic.
The psychiatric incarceration of certain individuals was prompted by their attempts to emigrate, to distribute or possess prohibited documents or books, to participate in civil rights protests and demonstrations, the wrong kind, obviously, and become involved in forbidden religious activities. Ooh, Orthodox Christianity, in other words. In accordance with the doctrine of state atheism, the religious beliefs of prisoners, including those of well-educated former atheists who had become adherents of a religious faith, was considered to be a form of mental illness that required treatment. The KGB routinely sent dissenters to psychiatrists for diagnosis in order to discredit dissidents as the product of unhealthy minds and to avoid the embarrassment caused by public trials. Highly classified government documents that became available after the dissolution of the USSR confirm that the authorities consciously used psychiatry as a tool to suppress dissent.
Now, I'd like you to leave that highlighted, and let's move to the bigger view. Let's embiggen, if you don't mind.
Okay. Except we lose the thing if it's embiggened.
Oh, oops. Okay, then let's go back. I didn't know that.
In
Forgive
Smallland?
me. There we go. Okay. The most important thing that I want you to take away from this is what I prepared in response to talking about the, I guess you could just say the pathologizing of any dissent against the pseudo-reality. And I have this prepared to say, and I'll also ad-lib a bit and talk about it. You guys know that I talk about the Go Free method, and I call all the isms together anti-whiteism or anti-Western animus. These are things like Marxism, racism, sexism, feminism, transgenderism, equality, that kind of thing. The current establishment it encompasses all of these things as their moral good, as their moral framework. Because in the anti-white narrative, it is moral to be anti-white. It is immoral to be pro-white or pro-Western. Just like how it is moral to be atheist, therefore it must be immoral to be a person of faith, specifically Christianity. Just like how everything was labeled anti-Soviet in the USSR, we see the same destruction of language by saying unless you are loyal to the concepts of anti-whiteism and uphold the anti-white narrative, then what are you? You're being anti-American. You're not being progressive enough. You're not being anti-white enough. You're not being atheist enough. Are you a deplorable? You're not a bigot, are you? This kind of language, meaning you are not just an obstacle to what they profess is, quote, progress or decency, but you must also be an evil person worthy of being forcibly silenced and removed from society. Now think about it. This is why a love and or celebration of your folk, your ethnic cultural history, and the successes of European peoples, what I generally refer to as a healthy sort of nominal kind of nationalism, has gone from normal and natural to unnatural and evil, even though the same language and framing is used for both then as it is now. As an example, I'm going to cite to you an American nationalist. Take an American nationalist from 100 years ago who openly professed love of his country, his people, and his traditions, and was willing to march off to die in a trench for those things. Today, in 2023, you can say the same thing with the same words. And in 2023, what does it mean about that American nationalist? All those things mean something entirely different. If you say the same thing in the same words today, the country no longer means antebellum America, but the U.S.-Israel war machine empire. His people, in quotes, are no longer the WASPs and similar-minded, similar-spirited Europeans that want to build the American project. No, it means anyone with an official U.S. passport and the millions of illegal aliens who come into the U.S. territory. That's what the people of America are now. His traditions are no longer Anglo-Saxon Christian cultural heritage. They are no longer a continuation of colonial American ethnic traditions, nor are they a mix of Protestant and English liberal values. No. Being an American now is an ersatz identity, a fake civic national identity based upon nothing but war machine propaganda, corporate branding, pop culture advertising, and values derived from decades of selfish hyper-individualism based on soulless materialism and corporate greed. This is how they have done the switch. They have walked us in 4 generations using the same language from a people that had a real heritage, a real identity, into being the mess and the deracinated, empty identity that we are today. And that's what I had prepared for that. What do you think on that, Newsfist?
Very nice. I agree. The Globo Homo project, the GAE, is all about the destruction not only of nation states but of identity. And I really, really believe that the people whose identities they are encouraging at the moment, they will be turned upon should their identity ever get in the way of this project. So, you know, it's, again, as you were saying, they want a sort of deracinated, atomized population that has no link to culture, no link to land, no link to family, and their basic link is to the government. And everything they do, literally every action, once they get the climate change in and the carbon trackers and stuff like that, literally every small action, from going to the toilet to eating a sandwich, the first thing you will have to think about is, does the government allow me to do that? That is the world that they want, and we must resist. We must resist. This is absolutely inhuman. There is no humanity in this system at all.
Absolutely. And so this is why I wanted to bring this up, because it is the core part of anti-whiteism. Because when you are lied to about from birth everything that your identity is supposed to be, it is very, very easy for them to get you to act against your interests, against the interest of your family, your children. Think about it. What are people today? The what did you call it earlier? The what kind of man? The
pseudo man.
The pseudo man.
Yeah,
the pseudo man today is like the soy jack meme, right?
That's
the
right.
pseudo man today, think about it. He believes he's being progressive. He believes he's being moral by sending his child to a gender specialist doctor at the age of 12 to talk her into taking testosterone injections and having permanent removal of her breast tissue. He believes that that's a moral, just thing. This is the kind of power that this stuff has over people. And we must resist it. We must fight it, because there is no future at all worth living if this pseudo-reality is to become everything. That's why our actions against this thing are justified. So I believe I'm going to wrap it up there. I have said enough, and I have covered everything I wanted to touch on. Is there any closing thoughts that you have before we move to the gracious paid chats that people have gifted us tonight?
No, just we might in another episode go into the evolution of the pseudo-reality as an idea and where it comes from. It's incredibly old. It's a trick that's been used many, many times, and it always works the same way. The control of language, the confusing of thought, hate speech laws, it is not sufficient that the government promulgate their narrative. It is absolutely essential that they stop any countervailing narrative, because when to sort of really get the pseudo-reality going, they must have a completely clear field where only the stuff that they say gets listened to, so that people will not be confused. They will not be exposed to disinformation, that will make them think the wrong thoughts. Oh, it's so totalitarian. You know what I mean?
It really is, yeah.
I mean, I guess my only parting question is, I wonder what drugs they give you for sluggish schizophrenia in this day and age. And I would just like to note, this stuff is already happening in the UK. If you express the wrong kinds of thoughts, and particularly if you go and see a psychiatrist and express the wrong kind of thoughts, the psychiatrist may phone up Prevent or may phone up the government and say, and basically snitch on you. The nation of snitches is also sort of necessary for such a system to exist, and we are rapidly getting there. And this is how you get these snitches. Again, refer back to 1984. You convince all of these people that the only way we can get to a better world is if everybody believes in the pseudo-reality at the same time. It's like this weird sort of, it's like if everyone jumps up and down at exactly the same time, the earth will move. And if any one person is not believing in the pseudo-reality, they are an obstacle to progress. And this is how you get these kind of like crazy formulations.
Yeah. So next week, we will be covering more of the formation of the pseudo-reality. You can tune
No,
in
actually,
next.
I think next week we're doing the foundations of psychological warfare.
Oh, okay.
Because
We're doing that next. Okay. All right.
fundamentally, the techniques by which the government inculcates
Oh,
the
okay. That's
pseudo-reality can best be described in terms of psychological warfare.
okay.
I tried looking at propaganda, but propaganda, when we're doing this stream, what I'm trying to do is of a thing, what is its essence, right? Like, what is the thing trying to accomplish? And propaganda is really just psychological warfare. It is just the blunt instrument of psychological warfare. It is the psychological warfare, the brutalizing of the mind, that is the key point. The propaganda is merely the the end point. So I want to sort of go into describing how psychological warfare works and some of the principles behind it. And once you sort of get these internalized, you can see it everywhere, basically.
Excellent. Well, then you guys definitely tune in next week for that. And before we get out of here, we do have some kind folks that have decided to share their money with us. Let me make sure I'm not missing anyone. There was nothing on Cash App this time. Usually there is, but let me refresh just to make sure. All right. Nothing showing up on Cash App. Now, we did have $3 donation over on PayPal, and thank you so much, but there's no words with it, no text at all. And since it shows your real name on PayPal, I won't be saying it out loud, but the initials are LG. So thank you very much, LG, for the $3 over on PayPal. It means so much. Over on Subscribestar, we have from E. Essington. E. Essington sent this at the very end of last stream, and it didn't show up until we had already closed. So E. Essington from last week for $10. Thank you so much, Mr. Essington, or Miss, I'm not sure. Essington says, love the focus of this limited series, want to see more. Well, there was definitely going to be many, many more weeks of this coming, so you will get your wish, and I will refresh both PayPal and Subscribestar once again, just to make sure we're not leaving anyone out. All right, nothing new there. Now over on Entropy, I will refresh again, and I will check for hyperchats on Odyssey and rants on Rumble, and still nothing there either. So we are clear and ready to wrap up. So Newsfist, any closing statements you want to make on the way out?
Just thanks for everyone listening. Happy Thanksgiving, and remember, we must resist. The future that they are trying to build for us is awful, horrible. It is completely anti-human.
Let's go back to the big view. Let's go back to the big view real quick.
In Biggin to the
in Biggin.
Yep.
And we will close with this. We will close with this. On Orwell's deathbed, the guy who wrote 1984, he said he can envision a future where something like 1984 would come to pass. And when asked by the interviewer what could be done, he just looked at the camera and said, "Don't let it happen. It depends on you." I'll see you next week, everybody. Have a great weekend and happy Thanksgiving.
Good night, everyone. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.